think everything's working now. Good evening or afternoon, everyone. This is yours truly, Just an Assassin. Some of you may also know me as the one and only Felix Ehrenthal over on Blue Sky. So about a month ago, or a few weeks ago, I was invited cordially to, or I was invited by Ooms to try and share information about Chinese culture. Now, prior to that interaction, with that person who I believe might be in the chat right now, I did actually have a small presentation planned that was intended to be shared with some friends as part of the presentation about different things we enjoy. And for me, as someone who is Chinese or has studied a lot in world history, I had planned out an entire presentation based on what I've experienced and what I know about Chinese culture in 60 minutes. But people should be trickling in now, or are starting to trickle in. I hope my audio works. Alright, OBS should be working now. So if I switch over to this browser, there we go. It's all working. So, as I've said, this will hopefully be 60 minutes, as I do my best to explain a lot, or a little bit of every part of Chinese culture. Maybe we'll go over 60 minutes as I go very overboard, and there will be a time for some Q&A as well, if anyone in the chat has questions. We are recording this live, and the VOD will be uploaded to YouTube soon. So, I also have the chat overlay turned off, and I have my alerts also turned off, because that way it won't interfere with the presentation itself. So, I believe without any further ado, let's get into it. And yeah, like I said, this will be put up on YouTube. VODs will be put in the chat. Let's get started. So, before we do the presentation, I am going to set some key points for everyone to understand. The first one is that I am not a historian. Okay? I did do some AP history courses on world history. I did Middle Eastern studies, Asian studies, but I am not a historian. I don't work in a museum. I am not someone who is who's been to university or done a major in Chinese culture. Everything you're going to see here in this presentation is research, experiences, things I've found on the internet, things I've experienced or have been taught to me growing up as a Chinese kid. As always, the best way to learn something is to experience it. This goes the same to everyone who is not Chinese or is open to Chinese culture. You know, travel around, talk to other Chinese people, with people who have knowledge about Chinese culture, consume Chinese media. That's the best way to experience it. Now, in this presentation, there's also going to be a few stereotypes addressed. As always, in the global world, everyone has different opinions on Chinese culture, impressions, maybe perceptions of it. We're going to address a few of it. Some of the stereotypes are unfortunately true or ground in reality, and some are absolute baloney. We'll explain that as the presentation goes on. Also, you might be reading this or watching the VOD and stream and think, okay, I have some questions of my own. Like I said, referring to the top point, there may be some questions I just do not have the experience nor the knowledge to answer it. So, if I can't answer your question, I'm sorry. But the internet's a wild place. You have plenty of options to look at. But today we're going to cover 4 main topics. We're going to go over the history and philosophy of China. We're going to touch a little bit on its language. We're going to go over its food. And we're going to go over its popular culture, things like what it's like in modern times, its art, its music, and how it appears in the internet and on social media. Alright? So, the first thing I'm going to do is we are going to delve right into Chapter 1. But first, we're going to establish some historical context. In very, very small, short layman's terms, China has over 3,000 years of history, food, and art as a civilization. We have multiple dynasties that stretch back centuries, all the way past the birth of Christ, to around 2000 or 3000 BC. We also have a huge, diverse diaspora that make up the country. Contrary to what people say, not everyone is the same ethnicity in China. We have over 56 different ethnic groups, and the majority would be the Hanzu, or the Han Chinese people. An important thing to also remember is we had what's called the Great Leap Forward. Now, the Great Leap Forward took place in the 1900s, and this was during the Cultural Revolution of China in the 60s. This involved a communist purge of history. Part of the Four Olds campaign to get rid of old history as a part of the scheme to provide revolutionary ideas and pave the way for new ways of thinking. The result of this was a huge erasure of temples, arts, relics, history, and philosophy. And a lot of this was unfortunately purged by the Communist Party. Now, after the Great Leap Forward, 1978 onwards, we had what's called the post-Mao era. During that period, and before that, you had a huge immigration to the West during the Cold War. And in doing so, a lot of Chinese immigrants brought their culture with them. Their history, their art, their food, their language with them. So this, and the post-Mao era, meant that the wider world was not exposed to Chinese culture until 1970s onwards. This was in thanks to Deng Xiaoping's foreign modernization campaign to open up. And you can compare this with Japan and how it opened up or entered the global stage compared to China in the wake of World War II. We'll touch more on this later. Right now, we have a modern resurgence of Chinese culture. There's many factors that contribute to this. There's both an internal and an external rediscovery of Chinese culture as people begin to have back to their roots. The rise of media and technology means that cultures have the chance to interact with each other, such as Chinese people and the US. A good example is Xiaohongshu and TikTokers merging with each other and interacting with each other after the ban in the US, and the geopolitics that is shaping the region. As of now, China is considered a global superpower, and we will touch more on that as we enter slides that talk about its contemporary habits, shall we say. Now, as we begin into history and philosophy, we're going to start at the very beginning. So, China is considered one of the cradles of civilization. That means that they're one of the first civilizations to develop in the world, and this refers to the early stages of human history as we know it. There were other cradles of civilization, such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, North America, Central America with the Olmecs, and the Polynesian Islands. China was one of them, and their major period and civilization was based around the Yellow River. A common theme throughout Chinese history is the idea of the dynastic cycle. China would go through multiple periods of unification and division, and this would happen for many, many years until very recently in the year 1911. Like I said, China initially started off with settlements around the Yellow River, but as they gradually migrated southward. They would eventually enter the Yangtze River, cross over there, and colonize the southern regions as well, and assimilating with the ethnic people there. There are also multiple capitals and cities throughout China. Beijing is the commonly known one, but we have also famous ones like Chang'an, Luoyang, and I don't know the pronunciation, but Kaifeng. We are not going to cover all of the dynasties of China. We're only going to go over the most important ones. This is because there are many different dynasties that have gone through from the earliest age to now. Brief history, we've got, and I say this off the top of my head, what was it? Xia Shang, Zhou, Qin, Han, Sui, Tang, Song. I want to say Jin, Yuan, Ming, Qing. It's a lot. We're gonna only go over the key ones. Okay? So, one of the first dynasties that were mentioned here is the Xia dynasty. This existed allegedly between 2070 to 1600 BC. The reason we say this probably did not exist is because there are no contemporary records of the Xia dynasty. We have no knowledge of writing, we don't know what people were like, we have no relics from that period. All we know about the Xia dynasty is from records from later dynasties, who would talk about the Xia dynasty as the birth of Chinese culture. And a lot of it is also rooted in myth, because the Xia dynasty, according to legend, was founded by a man named Yu the Great. He led survivors to form the dynasty after stopping the Great Flood. This may be an allusion and a parallel to Noah's Ark, but by and large, the story deals with the flooding of the Yellow River. There's a lot involved with dragons and new forms of earth, but by and large, what happened afterwards is that Yu the Great contributed to the rice farming method and a way to stabilize the soil so rice could grow, leading to a massive population boom. This is also where bronze and tea was invented here, allegedly. The famous story with tea is that the inventor accidentally had some tea leaves fall into his cup of hot water. He drank it, realized it was a lovely beverage, and then everything followed suit. There's also a few heroes from this era. One of them is Hou Yi, who is a legendary figure who shot down 9 sons, and where the myth of Chang'e comes from. We'll touch on this later when we go to the famous festivals and holidays in China. The next most famous one is the Zhou dynasty. This is from 1046 to 256 BC. This is a period of rapid expansion, and during this period there will be a huge rise in the areas of philosophy. And 3 main philosophies develop: Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism. During this period, it's still not considered a unified China. Yes, there are multiple kingdoms who swore allegiance to the Zhou, but these were vassal kingdoms with their own individual clans and groups of people. And as the dynasty progressed, they would eventually grow authority to challenge the king of the Zhou dynasty. This leads to the Spring and Autumn period, and eventually the fracturing into the warring states where multiple kingdoms vied for control of China. This is also where the art of war was written by Sun Tzu, but more importantly, this developed the idea of the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven is a philosophical idea. The concept behind this Mandate of Heaven is that a ruler is blessed by heaven and ordained to govern the people. If he behaves well and he respects the people's wishes, the land prospers. If he doesn't, heaven will punish him with floods and rapids and drought, and in doing so empower the people to rise up, for he has lost his legitimacy to rule. The people will rise up, a new ruler would be elected who is blessed by heaven and proven that he has the strength and the moral compass to rule, and this would continue through most of Chinese history. After the Zhou dynasty, we enter an era called the Qin dynasty, a very short period in China, from 221 to 206 BC. This is the first imperial dynasty, and we say this because the ruler of the dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, became the first emperor. This is the first instance in China where a man who ruled it who ruled the entire civilization, crowned themselves as emperor. This was a period of utter unification. You can see it on the map on the right. Currency, weights, writing, and bureaucracy were all homogenized into one. During this period as well, Qin Shi Huang also built the Great Wall. He linked the different fortifications around China to repel the north, and he also famously, after he died, the terracotta warriors were part of the mausoleum of which he was later interred in. Unfortunately, his unification came at the cost of extreme purges and prejudice, heavy censorship, execution for everything, and the only way he homogenized all these systems in China was by basically killing everyone. He died in 15 years because he drank mercury in a quest to seek immortality, and even though his dynasty collapsed after he died, his systems and the way he governed China is going to translate into future dynasties down the line. In fact, when other civilizations such as the Mongols and the Jurchen and the Manchu would eventually invade China, they would also pick up on these styles of governance as well. You can decide whether or not it was worth it. But after the Qin dynasty came the Han dynasty, from 202 BC to 220 AD, 400 years. This is the Roman Empire equivalent. There was a massive period of centralization and expansionism once again into Mongolia, parts of Vietnam and Laos, and anything westward. There was the Silk Road, and through this Silk Road, China actually discovered of Rome's existence. We refer to it as Fulin. We never got the chance to visit it, and there were no traders who ever made it to the edge and interacted with the Roman Empire. But we knew it existed of their language, and even to this day, we still thought the West spoke Latin until the British came to China in the 19th century. A huge thing to keep in mind is the concept of Sinicization. This is Chinese settler colonialism, in better words. China's expansionism was both a military conquest and cultural assimilation through marriage of different tribes, policies, reforms, and brutal military campaigns. They asserted themselves as the dominant empire through China, and many tribes and ethnic groups were slowly subsumed into the culture, eventually adopting their religion, beliefs, politics, while abandoning their old ideals. There was a huge demand about civil service to help fuel this expansionism. You had things like state exams and conscription. An important note here is also shockingly the development of women's rights. Women had a lot of power in the Han dynasty, while many of the men were put into civil service and to fight and govern the empire. A lot of the women were both either bureaucrats, scholars, patrons of the arts, and held important titles as they were heads of the family while their husbands were away. This collapse eventually led to the Three Kingdoms period and one of the first instances of multiple warlords fighting for the control of China once again. So after this, we fast forward a couple of years and we enter the Tang dynasty. This goes from 600 to 907 AD. This is considered the artistic peak of Chinese culture, a golden age for everything: poetry, music, philosophy, art, literature. During this moment, trade began to flourish. We eventually started interacting with Korea, Japan, and Tibet. You can see on the graph there, China at some point fought and interacted with the Tibetan Empire. We also had a system beyond the northwest, which expanded parts of the Silk Road. But during this period, there was also a rise of religious syncretism. You had Buddhist monasteries who began to take over as a major demographic in the Tang dynasty, and you also had the Alopan, or Assyrian Christians, who came over from the early church, and in Israel all the way over, and would eventually develop what would become known as Nestorianism. A famous historical figure would be Wu Zetian, which is the girl boss of Chinese history, one of the only female emperors in China, extremely based, in my opinion. So yeah, just something good. Esme, I see you there. I see you lurking in chat. If you have any questions, feel free to save them until the end and I'll read through the chat overlay. Moving on. we're gonna accelerate around 800 years. Also, hi, hello, Mischief Millie. We now touch on the Qing dynasty. This is the last dynasty of China from 644 AD to 1912 onwards. A good context we need to establish is that this is an era where China was under Manchu rule. From the Mongol invasion onwards, the Han people did not have an autonomy or the ability to self-govern within China. Multiple invasions from Genghis Khan, the Jurchen, the Manchu, led to China and the Han people being ruled over by a quote-unquote foreign empire. And then during the age of colonialism and imperialism, Europe began its race for the East. This started in the Renaissance when explorers began to try and look for alternate trade routes, and of course that led to the discovery of the New World. But eventually, groups like the British East India Company began to open up in China. This led to also conflicts like the Opium Wars and the Treaty of Nanking, and in turn, China tried to rise up with things like the Taiping and Boxer rebellions. Now, the Taiping Rebellion, for context, was one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, over 100 million dead, from a man claiming to be the brother of Jesus Christ. Have a read into it, it's crazy. But the Qing dynasty eventually ended in 1911, when Sun Yat-sen eventually led a nationalist party and began to try and modernize China. The last emperor actually was forced to abdicate, and he would live out the rest of his life as a commoner. Unfortunately, shortly after the Qing dynasty officially ended, World War II broke out. Now, most historians in Europe and America say that World War II began around 1939. For us, it was a lot earlier. The Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, and this was also during a massive period of infighting between a lot of Sun Yat-sen and, Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Party versus Mao Zedong and the Communist Party. A bunch of warlords were also fighting for their own purposes and for their own gains in China. In doing so, what happened was Mao led the Communist Party to fight the Japanese. After heavy casualties at the end of the war, and thanks to a thing he did called the Mao's Long March, he by and large controlled most of China. Chiang Kai-shek took most of his followers of the Nationalist Party and they fled to Taiwan, and to this day the two of them are still in a state of conflict. In fact, China and Taiwan have never actually signed a peace treaty, meaning they are still legally and technically at war. This entire period, post-World, from the British colonialism of China to the end of World War II, is what's collectively known as the century of humiliation for the Chinese people. So where does it bring us in present-day China? Well, after the end of World War II, during the Cold War, Mao would launch the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. This involved things like the Great Leap Forward and the Communist Bloc. They were both an ally and a rival of Soviet Russia. This unfortunately meant that they would open up to the world much later. Again, unlike Japan, who had the help from the US in foreign aid and reconstruction after World War II, China did not have this. So in the modern world, China eventually developed several administrative regions like Tibet, Macau, and Hong Kong. The latter two were former colonies that were into agreements by China. The current existing party is the People's Republic of China, or the PRC, or you can also have also known as the CCP. There is a heavy social media monopoly, heavy government oversight, but they still hold power in the world through trade and initiatives like the One Belt, One Road, which links China to the West through a modernized version of the Silk Road, and the Maritime Silk Road that connects China to Africa through various trade routes. In terms of its politics on the global stage, China is still undergoing a lot of emigration to the West, and is still a major competitor against the US. In terms of its more infamous sides, you have things like the Triads, the Chinese Mafia, who are also on the global stage and have a deep-rooted thorn in Southeast Asian history. So, very briefly, that's all the history and civilization, and all the global events that led China to what it is now. Three main Chinese philosophies have endured because of this: Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Confucianism and legalism are opposites of each other. You can see them on the slide right here. Legalism takes a more cynical attitude of the world. They believe that humans are inherently selfish, must be controlled. Deterrence through harshness is what creates a strict social order. Confucianism is the opposite. It talks about ritual, filial piety, mutual respect, and in doing so, the relationship between the state and the person, the father and the son, the older and the younger, the master and the servant. These different harmonies create a peaceful era. I need to also specify that Confucianism evolved into Neo-Confucianism somewhere during the, I believe it's either the Tang Dynasty or one of the later dynasties of China, which eventually took Confucianism and evolved it into spiritual and physical morality. Unfortunately, sexism also became a huge part of this, where women were stuck in the household and were led to ideas of very restrictive female identity. In between Confucianism and legalism is a more abstract philosophy known as Taoism. Taoism is simply known as it is what it is. You can compare it to Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism. The concepts of yin and yang, white and black, directly represent not necessarily good and evil, but more light and darkness. Yin and yang refer to shadow and light. Tao, in Chinese as Dao, is known as the way. The concept of Taoism is for there to be good and bad in a constant cycle. It is what it is, and in doing so, provokes someone to be more carefree, not involve themselves when worrying so much, and it eventually would become merged with things like Buddhism and Confucianism into its own way of thinking through all of China. They have things like the elemental systems and qi, alchemy, and medicine. We'll touch on that as well. Now, a question you might be asking is, the divine cosmology, what is the religion like in China? You may have heard of it through things like Sun Wukong. It's a bureaucracy. Because different cultures tend to have their religions be a reflection of what their cultures was like, Chinese culture rationalized that whatever fundamental forces were governing the universe were like a celestial bureaucracy. A court that is both all-powerful and incompetent, and through rules and rituals the gods could communicate with mankind. They were gods for everything: rivers, local shrines, mountains, corners in the street. Even in the underworld, there were 10 kings of hell. The idea is, to keep up with the machine that is reality, gods had to take over and provide different roles, assume different duties, and fulfill their own missions. Reincarnation is a thing. The idea is that while heaven is the global admin office for all the gods to operate, hell is where everyone goes after they die, and you reincarnate into based on what you were like, maybe a plant, maybe a human, maybe an animal. Buddhism did merge with this idea of Chinese religion. We don't necessarily have a name for this religion throughout China, but just know that they eventually adopted Buddhist and Hindu deities. A huge concept of it is, of course, qi, as I mentioned. It's the idea of universal essence. An interesting footnote is that, yes, qi is stored in the balls, because Chinese people believe that qi was also the breath of life. So therefore, sperm contained the breath of life. I'm not going to elaborate. You get the idea. There is a order to divine cosmology. We have primordial forces like yin and yang, good and evil, and of course they have magic, faith, and qi as well. Gods are obviously below that. We have things like the Celestial Emperor, Ne Zha, Erlang Shen. They are gods of different domains: war, justice, law. And below that, you've also got things like immortals. These are people in Chinese mythology who have ascended. They've done through alchemy or divine feats. They were able to achieve a state of enlightenment and immortality. They can do superhuman feats. They can live forever. They are kind of like demigods. Divine beasts are its own thing. Think of dragons, Qilin, the Taotie, beasts who represent different elemental aspects. They bring rain, they bring thunder, they control the sky, seas, and the forest themselves. We have mortals and animals, but one thing I want to clarify that's different from Western mythology is the concept of the demon, or yaoguai. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yaoguai are essentially animals who have cultivated qi improperly or have achieved sentience. Maybe they're plants who have been affected by qi and become beasts of their own. They are not the same as the demons of hell. Okay? These are creatures of chaos. They are improper, and they're kind of both like the Fae and vampires. They all desire to eat, to cultivate qi, and to basically form their own dominions. You can see with the green and red arrows that there is a cycle. Typically, when mortals become powerful and good, they become immortals and then gods, and gods and immortals can also be demoted into demons if they commit sins, or they commit heresy, or don't fulfill the mortal duties. Another subsection of this is the undead. Now, the undead, ghosts, skeletons, zombies like the Jiangshi, they are the results of abnormal magic. The undead are not part of the reincarnation cycle, so they manifest as spirits who have either died from a fortunate circumstance, people who have not had the proper burial rituals. You get the idea. The idea of the undead is that they're typically not fought or exercised, they are pacified. The way to defeat an undead is to return their body to rest. And this is what sets it apart from Western religions. Don't worry about the elemental cycle. I'm sure you're all looking at the wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. We're going to get to that soon. It's a very complex elemental system. Now, as promised, there are some important Chinese festivals that we celebrate as a culture. The first is the Lunar New Year. The Lunar New Year is aptly named because it follows the lunar calendar instead of the solar calendar. We have the zodiacs as well. We are currently in the year of the horse. It's basically an entire week of festivals and family dinners, people to visit each other, hand out red packets to kids, and bless each other for the new year. The origin of this is quite devious. Basically, there's a monster called Nian that terrorized people every year. People eventually developed the firecrackers and the color red to scare it away. The Lunar New Year also is filled with things like the lion dance, the dragon dance. You can look it up on YouTube. They are feats of martial achievement. The Mid-Autumn Festival is another famous one. This is often during the autumn solstice and associated with foods like the mooncake. The origin of this story is about a woman who, at some point, her husband shot down 9 suns, which were causing immense global warming, and as a reward, they were both given 2 pills to become immortal. Chang'e, the woman, unfortunately ate both of them, and so she basically overloaded on divine energy and she ascended into the heavens. She rested on the moon and is looked after by her attendants, the rabbits. This is very simple. This may or may not draw parallels to Vina and the Loporrits on the moon in the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV. But every day on the Mid-Autumn Festival, Chang'e gets to descend down to the earth to be reunited with her husband once again. This usually involves things like family gatherings under full moon, again, the eating of the mooncakes. Japan and Korea have their own lunar solstice as well, under different names as well. The third I will mention is the Dragon Boat Festival. This takes place on the 5th day of the 5th month along all the various rivers of China. And the origin of this is that a poet drowned himself after a lot of misfortune in his life, and the people loved him so much that they would throw sticky rice to stop the fishes from eating his body. In the same way, this eventually evolved into a racing festival of people on boats to try and race on the river, generally for good luck, sportsmanship, and people will eat things like zhongzi and wine, and drink wine to, celebrate this poet's life. If you've ever seen that TikTok of the kid oral farming and dancing on the dragon boat, that is where the Dragon Boat Festival is where it is. 5 is the lucky number. The 5th day on the 5th month. 5 is a very auspicious number in Chinese culture, so that's kind of where the Dragon Boat Festival gets its reputation from. So, That was quite a lot. Many different slides. Take a breather. We're going to now move on to the next portion, which is the language of China, or specifically known as Chinese language. The first thing we need to identify is that there are two aspects to the Chinese language: the written and the spoken. Chinese language is what's known as a logogram. It's written like it's a symbols or signs used to represent entire words, ideas, or concepts. Cuneiform I think is in Sumeria, and hieroglyphs from ancient Egypt are also known as logograms. The idea is to take simple characters and evolve into complex ones. You can look at the bottom right chart. This is an evolution of how these words came to be. Fish eventually warped into different scripts until eventually becomes the word that you see today. Same goes for fire and for horses and ears. The reading order is very different from the stroke order. Usually when you write it out, write it from top to bottom, left to right. For those of you with Boss Baby vibes, think of it like how you would draw a transmutation circle in Fullmetal Alchemist. There's very specific order, the stroke is important, and all of that. Much like manga, the reading order for Chinese comics and Chinese language is top to bottom, right to left. You can see this on things like wooden sticks or tapestries of Chinese poems that are vertical instead of horizontal. There are two major writing scripts. Simplified is the current one that's used in mainland China, and the traditional one is used in Taiwan, Macau, and Hong Kong. There are other variations that exist amongst minorities, but by and large, if you were to look at a Chinese website that's in Chinese, it's either simplified or traditional. The difference is in what's used. Simplified is obviously more robust, it's easier to draw. Traditional just has more words. Typing it is a bit of a nightmare. There are many ways to type out Chinese on a keyboard. You can see there's an example that I put on the right. Typically, when you write a Chinese word, there are concepts that are involved, and radicals and phonetic bars will tell you how it's pronounced, okay? It's a very simple one. Two symbols for wood, which is mu, becomes the word lin, which just refers to forest. Sunlin is just one character with three symbols of wood, two symbols of wood meaning forest, many trees, okay? You can go even deeper, but by and large, this is how these words work. Now, on to the spoken language, and this is where the tough part comes in. Chinese spoken language is collectively known as Mandarin. 普通话 is the largest dialect. It is translated to 普通 and Hua, which is known as the common speech. Much like written language, there are many different dialects across regions. You can think of it like how, with the English language, there are many different accents in the Midwest, in New York, in California, in London, Yorkshire, Scotland, Ireland. Okay? An example that we have is Cantonese from the Canton region, or Guangzhou. When you read it, we also have what's called pinyin. Pinyin is the romanized system in Latin to identify phonemes and how to speak it. The style, when you look at pinyin, is the order. We have the initial, the final, and the tone, or the syllable. And this is what sets it apart from your traditional English language. The initials, you can think of it like the consonants, the final is the vowel, and the tone is what gives it a bit of a pitch or variation. There are 4 different pitches, as you can see on the... Actually, we'll be on a later slide. And also thing to notice is that there is a lot of contextual sentence grammar. You can refer to the bottom right, where you see a small, simple Chinese sentence. The grammar is very different. We have no forms of tense. We have to listen for context. The spoken form isn't really transcribed easily. Typically, you write it and then you say it, not the other way around. There's also a level of formal and informal structure in grammar. For example, if you want to tell someone to not smoke, it's very different from saying, in English, it would be like saying, please don't smoke, to no smoking. We have a similar structure in the Chinese spoken language. Now, how are you going to differentiate looking at the Chinese writing and figure out the pinyin? You can't. When you're raised as a child, you're just told, That's how you say it, and that's how you gotta say it. Here's an example, okay? Note the difference in sentence structure. In English, you usually have subject, verb, object. You add in adjectives, adverbs as well. In Chinese, you have a very specific order. Subject, when, where, how, then the verb, and then the object. Okay? And you can also see the pinyin is put over the Chinese written characters. Oftentimes when you walk around in a street in China, you won't see the pinyin, but this is to help you to understand, right? If I was to read it out loud, the first sentence, I would say, 我昨天下午在体育馆学游泳. If you listen to that again, you will hear that there are different tones that I have been saying. And this means you can do some really nifty things like puns, play on words, things that are often used in Chinese poetry. But by and large, this is the Chinese language as a whole. Okay? Now we get to the good stuff. The food. We're going to touch on some stereotypes. I will address it. Let's address the allegation in the room. Do Chinese people eat cats and dogs? The answer is unfortunately yes, but also no. There is no nationwide ban on eating cats and dogs in China. There are national bans in cities. Yep, the memes are there. The memes are there. But yes, there is no nationwide ban. Local cities might have put rules on not eating dogs and cats. Unfortunately, in the rural areas, it is very much a phenomenon. This is a view that is shifting over time. People have started to adopt more cats and dogs as pets, and in doing so, the public perception is, oh, we're not going to eat them. But there is a very liberal stance on food. Vegetarianism and veganism are a thing in China, but the prevalent idea is to waste not, want not. Instead of simply eschewing meat altogether, or not eating certain things, Chinese culture is of the philosophy to use as much of the animal as possible. This means things like chicken feet, offal, pig stomach, cow kidneys. Is to use as much of the animal as you can in your food. We also eat a lot of things. Seafood, animal parts, even bird nests, believe it or not. Eating is also seen as a social gathering. We have lots of family dinners, collectively eat as a group. There are business and formal meals you might have with your boss or with your employees. But wine isn't typically drunk in these meals. A lot of it is food, a lot of it is tea and beer. Shark fin soup is a huge issue within Chinese culture. It is considered a luxurious delicacy, but the process of which shark fin soup is obtained is still very controversial. Alternatives are being sought, and a lot of Chinese restaurants will serve a synthetic or substitute version of shark fin soup, but it is still a problem, and some people are very, very morally, what's the right word? They're very clear on their stance on shark fin soup. And yes, we eat a lot of rice or noodles. These things are used interchangeably because rice is often grown down south in the Yangtze River because the Yangtze River is near the equator and it's humid enough to grow rice, whereas up north it's mostly noodles and bread. But as a PSA to everyone, please buy a rice cooker. It is going to solve your issues. And don't you ever get microwavable rice. I will find you. And I will bring shame upon your ancestors. So, there are 4 traditional versions of Chinese food, and they come from different regions. We have Cantonese, we have Sichuan, Shandong, and Jiangsu, Jue, Chuan, Lu, and Su. They're all individual, they have their own different things that make them unique. With chili, with seafood, with sweetness, with presentation, steaming, and stir-frying. Again, hot and cold food are served in equal measure. Rice, noodles, and tofu are the main things. But we have what's also called a 5-course meal. This means sort of involves the overwhelming palate in the food in the food. I don't know what the term is. Like the culinary world, we have soup, veggies, meat, noodles, rice, and fruit desserts. And typically, we also have things like nuts and fruits as appetizers. There is a huge street food culture that permeates throughout China. In fact, McDonald's is not really seen as a fast food; it's mostly seen as a luxurious Western kind of thing. Which means we have siu mai, fish balls, chicken noodles, skewers, instant noodles, all of that. Very common. You can see food carts that will sell it for a few bucks, even. There are also different kinds of tea. We have six technically. Red, white, green, yellow, oolong, and black. And the classification for teas are based on two things. The tea plant and the region, but also, as an honorary third, the production method. For example, what green tea is fermented in a different way compared to red and black tea. But a good note is that sometimes tea leaves are compressed into little biscuits. This is just to save storage space and accelerate the preservation. And in traditional Chinese teapots, you would break off chunks of the tea biscuit and then put it in the kettle for boiling. So, that's the food. We're gonna touch on the final section here, which is art and societal culture. We'll start first with the art, music, and fashion within Chinese culture. In terms of its art, a lot of it is based on, it's very brush related. Watercolor, calligraphy, and literature, it's all done with the brush. We adore our landscapes, we love our city life, and we love drawing our animals. In terms of poetry, a good famous figure is Li Bai, the drunken poet. He often was an alcoholic, and in doing so, he composed many poems about nature and the world. Even a very famous Chinese warlord named Cao Cao was also a poet, as he engaged in his conquests throughout China. In terms of clothing, we usually use silk. There are many different, outfits across the ages, but the colloquial term that we use for the dynasty's clothing and of ancient history is Hanfu. Han meaning ethnic Han people, and Fu meaning clothing. You will also see things like the Cheongsam and the Zhongsam, which rose during the 20th century. The Cheongsam and Zhongsam are post-Qing dynasty, or the 20th century clothes that women and men would wear. Zhongsam is things like martial artists, soldiers, and businessmen would wear during the communist era, and the Cheongsam is a national clothing and an icon in Chinese culture. You may have seen it. It's like a long, tall skirt made of silk with embroidery and like a single slit down the leg for that woman to walk. In terms of music, we have lots of different woodwind instruments, strings and brass, giant drums, because we adore our war drums and our ritual drums to beat. We have cymbals, the pipa and the guqin, and these are often used within Chinese festivals or public performances. Another reason why a lot of this culture has developed is because in China there is the idea of the courtesan culture. During the high class in dynasties of China, women would sort of have places where they would perform the arts, show off songs, practice, and show off their techniques with poetry and music, among other things. By and large, there will be parallels to brothels in Western culture, but these are more of the high class variety, and things like imperial courts and noble houses would have their own courtesan culture. And the wealthy districts would also have courtesans who would be performing and entertaining high status patrons and lords. In terms of its literature, there are 4 great classics in Chinese history. We're going to go over them from most popular to the less obscure. Okay, the biggest one everyone knows is Journey to the West. Sun Wukong inspired Goku. He's also worshipped as a deity in China, and there are lots of anime tropes that stem from Journey to the West, like art, mystic arts, divine abilities, transformations, aspects of nature, relics, and typical writing tropes like history and the going to the gods for help, infighting, and stuff like that. It is a common intro to the Chinese pantheon, but it is also an allegory for Buddhism and political satire with how Sun Wukong has to navigate the divine world. second one we got is Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This details the fall of the Han Dynasty and is the inspiration behind the infamous Japanese series called Dynasty Warriors made by Koei, which is kind of ironic, but the Romance of the Three Kingdoms is very popular in Southeast Asia. So is Sun Wukong. It is a commentary on state and history. It is focused as a war epic. You can think of it like Game of Thrones, but it is a hidden tragedy. You have figures like Dong Zhuo, Lu Bu, Cao Cao, who carved out their legacy throughout Chinese history and are still seen as icons in pop culture. One of them also, the famous man Guan Yu, is seen as a actual god of war and was deified later on. The third one is the Water Margin. It is the tale of 108 outlaws and heroics. Think of it like your band of brothers. This was a book that talked about the petty history of the people and is the author's idea of depicting what common people were like in the Wild West. This is where you had stories of brotherhood, duty, the idealized outlaw, the man who defies the system, who strikes up his brothers to forge a name for themselves. And that's usually where it goes, details of their sagas, what they did, and the idea of, bro code and loyal to the very end, that kind of gusto, rah, The last one is The Dream of the Red Chamber. This is an episodic record of two families going through a very, a period of history where it's left rather vague. This is a commentary for the cycle of a dynasty, how a nation rises and falls, and how it affects the people living within. The levels of romance and rivalry are part of it. It's a very, kind of like a Romeo and Juliet setting, but it's also a huge insight into gender theory in China. It's just the rivalries and the love stories are a commentary for how gender roles are like, them being challenged, them being adopted, and how Chinese gender theory is like in this period when it was published. We now move on to some other aspects in popular culture, one of them being Kung Fu. Now, I need to specify. In Mandarin, Kung Fu is known as Gong Fu, and this does not exclusively mean martial arts. Gong Fu directly translates to any study, learning, or practice that requires patience, energy, and time to complete. Chinese martial arts is typically known as Wushu, and the earliest form is Shaolin. There are many forms, variations, and practitioners. There are different families, schools, and sects who develop different fighting styles. What was emerged from self-defense eventually became a symbol of national pride and strength. There are multiple forms like Ba Gua Zhan, Eagle Claw, Xing Yi Quan, which is a spear. Again, we have Shaolin, we have Wing Chun as well. And all of this was popularized by, movies. Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Donnie Yen, these were the famous actors who brought martial arts to the filmmaking world, right? There is a subsection as well, like Gun Fu, popularized by John Woo. And martial arts in general incorporates a lot of different things, like the axes, hammers, the Dao Jian, which are the cutting and piercing sword, the spear, the rope dart, the meteor hammer, the Pu Dao, and the Da Dao, which is the glaive and the horse cutting blade as well. We are going to get to one thing you said about Shaolin Showdown, and we're going to touch on that as well. Now, a subset of the idea of martial arts is the concept of wuxia. I think I pronounced that, the martial hero genre. Wuxia translates to martial hero. It's a bit of a punk martial arts. Think of things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Condor Trilogy, Where Winds Meet, very popular game nowadays. It's the idea of the pugilist world, the anarcho-martialist fantasy, because you would have the ideas of the Miaotang, which is the imperial court, the state, the system, the political rigidity of an empire or government, versus the Jianghu, which is the pugilist world, meaning rivers and lakes, local heroes, legends of martial artists, the knights errant, the Chinese Don Quixote, where sex and martial arts interchange and battles erupted all across the untamed wilderness, all the name for the modern people. There is a subgenre of this called xiansha, which is about demons and deities. And the difference here is with wuxia. The idea is for humans to break their human limits and become superhumans. In doing so, there's a huge commentary about the price of freedom and what happens when you become more and more powerful, but it's the rule of co-realism. You, as a swordsman, might be able to soar across the world, leap from tree to tree, fight with blades that can spin around you and have, spew fire and manipulate chi to strike at people. But that's different from Xianxia, where gods and demons can sort of do things like collapse reality, domain expansion, alter the fabric of reality, yada yada yada. By and large, wuxia is a very utopic what may have been. It's centered around history. The good guys might lose, but the idea is the journey before destination. Women also were in it. There were a lot of tropes of women who broke gender norms, became famous swordsmen in their own right. Again, Where Winds Meet is an example of this. It's the idea of what might have happened during the fall of the Tang Dynasty. So, give that game a try. It's very, very good. Now, aside from Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism, we have this concept, this elemental system throughout China. Collectively, they're known as the Bagua, Feng Shui, and Wuxi. You might, if you take a look at that on the right, that is the elemental system that we have. Fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. That is our elemental system. We have also 4 cycles of how it interacts. Fire heats metal, metal cuts, fire heats metal, or melts it, metal cuts wood, wood absorbs water, wood uproots the earth, and the earth absorbs water, and water douses fire. You have something the reverse, where water condenses on metal, earth is mined away to reveal metal, fire cools down into the earth, and wood combusts into fire, and wood grows from water. The idea is to achieve harmony with every aspect. Again, there's not a lot of moral commentary on this. Time and natural phenomena are the result of Wuxi. Fire is doused by water, but also water is can be evaporated by fire. The elemental cycle is through all of creation. With Wuxi, you have what's called Feng Shui. This is its application practically. The idea is that architecture, geography, and interior design, they all affect the flow of qi. Placing your bed in your certain place, your desk, your bathroom, your doors. An example of this is how in many Chinese cities, the south entrance is typically the main place where people leave. The west and the east are seen as, different, auspicious directions because of the sun rising, the sun setting. Bagua is a form of divination. It is also known as the 8 trigrams. Broken and unbroken. You might see them in the flag of South Korea. That is because the South Korean, that is a example of Bagua. In very simple layman's terms, it's sort of divination, fortune telling, hexagrams, permutations, yada yada yada. You can think of it kind of like the Philosopher's Stone or the studies of alchemy and the occultism in Western culture. This idea translates directly into Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine is very different from Western medicine. It's considered like a pseudoscience because Tuina, cupping, Chinese medicine, and acupuncture, there's a lot of debates in the academic world and the medical field of whether or not they actually work. Some people say it does, some people say it don't. I'm not a doctor. My opinions are my own. Of course, Chinese medicine has its own controversies. It's based in herbal medicine, but there's also controversies like deer antler, rhino horn, and all of that, and all of the poaching and animal hunting that comes with that. But Chinese medicine is focused on the idea of the internal alchemy, the furnace. The human body is its own entity. Typically, when someone ingests medicine or interacts with pressure points, meridians, and key nerve endings, it is to stimulate the internal qi in the body. Bone structure and massaging affect your internal alignments, things like resetting your your nodes and your structure is a way of letting qi flow throughout the body. In some way, it is correlated with the bloodstream and the circulatory system. But the bloodstream has its own idea of yin and yang with heating and cooling qi. You may have heard this whenever you talk to a Chinese, like a dietitian, talking about Yit Hei and Dong Hei, or healing and cooling qi. The idea is that the body is it will naturally try to adjust from external forces and try and self-regulate itself. So things like foods, temperatures, and drinks are a way of either heating up the body and cooling it down. It's qi for things to flow. Example would be like drinking hot tea when it's winter time to level your body temperature, so it opens up the blood vessels so qi can flow easier. The cooling qi can be when it's hot out on summer and you eat fruits and vegetables, and the idea is that it brings down your body. There are also things like, for example, drinking hot water when you're hot, because this naturally forces your body to accelerate its cooling mechanism further. You can see on the right there are a lot of diagrams to discuss different nodes and things to press and how they would affect your body. Again, this is all traditional Chinese medicine. It's your call whether or not this is real or not, because it operates very differently from the fundamentals of Western medicine. So, we're now going to shift our gaze to the internet, because China's internet is very different from things like Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Everything we have is a substitute in China. This is because China has something called the Great Firewall. Everything political in China is censored or regulated. You'll have periods where certain dates are under certain maintenance, where bans still persist, and it's actively enforced. VPNs aren't banned, and they are a way for people to bypass it. People in China use VPNs all the time. They are trying to ban VPNs, but by and large, we have a long way to go. The idea behind social media is to exert a level of governmental control. Never copy, only replace. And in turn, you control the internet, you control the people. This means things like Google, we have Baidu, Facebook, WeChat, PayPal, Alipay, Twitter, Weibo, eBay, Taobao, YouTube, Youku. Amazon or Netflix has like Bilibili TV or something like that. Or, well, I think Twitter would be Bilibili. The idea is that if the government can create their own forms of the internet, they can regulate people's free speech, and they can, have a hold on what's being said. This extends to things like online banking and businesses as well. The way businesses work in China is if a company from America wanted to open, let's say, a branch in China, you would have to have the Chinese branch, a Chinese entrepreneurial branch open, be approved by the government, and then connected to the Western branch in China. That way, the government oversight can continue. It's a can of worms. I'm not here for politics. That's just how it works. Now, we come to two of the last slides, the more bigger issues that are currently prevailing in Chinese society today. The first one is the concept of the generational gap. Every culture has this, but it's quite common in Chinese culture. There is a huge general clash between the young and the old. The youth are typically given high expectations and career restrictions, whereas the elderly are almost treated as, again, respect your elders. At the same time, the dual nature of this is that the elderly have a lot of lack of support and care. The younger generation also face unhealthy academic pressure. China is unfortunately not only has one of the largest education systems, but also the most brutal. There is a tragic case of suicide rates and mental health that comes out of examinations as well. And there's a huge generational divide between people staying at home or emigrating abroad. Traditions involving and in fact generals as well. And again, the old Chinese joke of you can be anything, but you can be anything as long as it's a lawyer, doctor, or dentist. But this is a problem that has permeated for quite a while. And why is this? The reason for why this happened is due to World War II and the Cultural Revolution. again, if we refer back to the 3,000 years or more of Chinese history, the Cultural Revolution eventually created an erasure of history. The Great Leap Forward and the purging of the Four Olds meant that a lot of the old traditions were swept away. It's extremely insular mentality where anything had to feel the state. And in doing so, a lot of the older generation were encouraged to put all their effort to saving the younger. This creates a major nationwide societal upheaval and collapse, which when China opened up to the world, suddenly you had this massive shift between the state-bound duty versus the self-bound actualization of American and European ideals. This is further exacerbated by modernization. The One-Child Act, or the One-Child Policy, was an attempt by the government to curb overpopulation. This failed horribly because, again, due to the gender roles, a lot of men were growing up, as girls were often left to the wayside. But in doing so, the One-Child Policy meant that you had a lot of old people who were left alone or left untaken care of, as the child would go abroad and do their own thing. This eventually becomes the Two-Child Act, and still changing, but it further exacerbated the divide between the elderly and the young generation. Obviously, younger generation is becoming more individualistic, and this did not help with the events of 2014 onwards and the political divide. In Hong Kong, there's a huge political discourse that happened over the Umbrella Revolution and the 2019 protests and onward. The growing lack of patriotism is also a huge factor. The global tensions between China and the US and China and Taiwan means that the younger generation are feeling a larger divide again between the older generation. You will see this in a lot of things like Chinese dramas and Chinese family films, where a huge chunk of the focus is the expectation of the older generation versus the want of the younger generation to sort of branch out, explore the world on their own. Realistically, as China enters and continues to be a part on the global stage, this contrast in ideals and the generational gap is only going to it probably will get worse. But it is in this period where we are getting a huge surge of Chinese culture. Again, all these discussions you've had about history, culture, and food, this is a product of globalization. And the more Chinese culture emigrates westward and how it circulates on the internet, the more barriers are broken down with people bridging and reaching out to each other. It's a step for Americans and Europeans to interact with Chinese culture and understand how it works and sort of the huge cultural legacy behind it. So, I believe that's basically the presentation in a nutshell. Let me go through the chat and answer some of your questions. Also, I see some of you did put your comments as well. Let's have a look. Shaolin Showdown. Yes, Shaolin Showdown, it is a show that exists. It's an American animated series, but you can also think of it sort of like Shaolin Warriors. Shaolin is, again, very popular. Thanks to Jackie Chan, Donnie Yen, and Bruce Lee. They were the pioneers. Of course, you might have different opinions on them as a character, but they had a legacy with them as well. I knew feng shui with colors, but never made the connection to the elemental table. That's so cool. Yeah, we didn't have... you will notice that the elemental system is very different from Chinese culture. Different from the, what was it? Greek culture. Aristotle's earth, fire, air, and water, and ether as a fifth element. China's one is more about natural phenomena. You might wonder about the colors and why metal is white. Metal is considered white because of silver, but it's also associated with lightning. as people believe that, it's like celestial metal and conductivity and electricity is a result of metal. The reason why water is portrayed as black instead of blue is because before, water, we don't really have a thing for the concept of a clear color. So because water, it's often, when you look at it, it's very clean, or very like a reflection in the vessel and how it's used, or in natural areas like puddles or rivers, it's under like a very dark color because of the soil, so people associated that with water as well. Is there any questions you guys have? Feel free to type them out. I've got like another 15 minutes or so. We have time. Okay, fair enough. This is really awesome. Yeah, it's great. I'm glad you guys had a chance to look at it. Like I said, Chinese culture is extremely complex, and is an interesting contrast between the 3,000 years of history and the modern history of today. But by and large, that is most of Chinese culture in a nutshell, as you can see. By and large, a Chinese culture, you know that there is a lot of moral complexities and the occasional contradiction that's over. It's just like yin and yang. It's all part of it. Things like the dynastic cycle, the elemental cycle, we love our periods of history. So, and as a way of rationalizing such an extensive history that encompasses millennia, cycles are a way of how we try and understand reality. Again, the moral compass thing can be debated or not. There's a very famous quote from a politician who said, doesn't matter if it's a white cat or a black cat as long as it catches mice. And I think that's most of Chinese culture in general, the idea of ambivalence and moral grayness that exists. But yeah, that will be all for today. It's really fascinating to learn and see about the history of such a longer-lived nation, baby in comparison nation, which is the US. Oh yeah, speaking as someone who is staring at the US history from an outsider, it is definitely a lot more it is also quite interesting as well, hearing about the US evolution. But I suppose I would classify that the US's history could have been could go far more black to Native Americans and their history was like. Again, I believe Native Americans were also one of the cradles of civilization as well, owing to how they crossed into Alaska during the Ice Age. But I reckon that if we got more access to Native American history through the written language, maybe in their stories, maybe I suppose you would end up with a civilization and in history that's actually kind of similar with China, because the same goes for things like Greece and Egypt as well. Though again, 3,000 years is very, very hard to condense it down. And I think a reason why a lot of Chinese culture is so heavily documented is, again, thanks to Qin Shi Huang and what he did in the Qin dynasty. Again, within those 15 years, he did unify China through extremely brutal methods. But in doing so, his basis for government with the language and the weighing system, that's still used to this day. And that's kind of the reason why Chinese culture has preserved throughout, as through this radical homogenization, a lot of history became well documented and didn't really evolve over the years. Even civilizations like the Mongols, when the invasion and eventually the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, they eventually adopted the Chinese culture as well. Just a testament to how things were. Yeah. So, I believe this brings us to the end of our presentation. We are nearing the end of the stream. Thank you to everyone who's watching and has stuck through me yap for about an hour. The VOD will be up on YouTube, as said before, for you all to watch and browse through. But without further ado, I will bid you all good night. Again, I do apologize if anyone is watching and got confused from the time zones, because when I initially put up the thing on Blue Sky, I made the mistake of saying 3 p.m. GMT instead of 3 p.m. PST, so yeah, that's on me. But yes, thank you all so much for watching. For those of you in chat, if there's any other questions you'd like, I'm on Discord. You can find me there. But yeah, that'll be all for today. I'll put up the VOD. I'll put up the VOD's channel as well for y'all. And yeah, I'll see you all later. And yeah, catch you next time, folks. Have a safe night.